For many decades, beginning with the purported crash of a vehicle of unknown origin at Roswell, New Mexico in 1947, there have been many rumors regarding the involvement of the U.S. government in the field of UAP, from crash retrievals to interactions and allegations of a broad cover-up of their activities in this arena, even making its way to congressional hearings, of which another one is scheduled. Amid this, there have been whistleblowers coming forward claiming that yes, indeed, there have been retrievals, and that the U.S. knows far more than what it admits about UFOs. I have stated before that I am a skeptic of an alien origin for the UFO UAP phenomenon, but my mind is open and can be changed. I am not, however, skeptical that people see things in the sky that they cannot explain. That is why we refer to the phenomenon or phenomena as unidentified. But in having an open mind, I am willing to consider both sides of the question of government involvement in UFOs. So this and next week's episodes will be from two differing viewpoints from within the U.S. government. This week is whistleblower and former Pentagon official Lue Elizondo on the pro side, ultimately saying the U.S. government knows far more than it lets on, and does indeed have recovered materials from Roswell. And next week, as a counterpoint interview, will be Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. I leave it up to you, the listener, to decide.
You have fallen into Event Horizon with John Michael Godier.
Lue Elizondo is a former senior leader of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, ATIP. Previously, Lue oversaw counter-espionage and counter-terrorism investigations worldwide for the U.S. Department of Defense, and also worked for the Office of the National Counterintelligence Executive and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Elizondo is a proud U.S. Army veteran and later served his country throughout the world, including South Korea, Latin America, the Caribbean, and Afghanistan. Elizondo is a graduate of the University of Miami, where he studied microbiology and immunology. Lue Elizondo, welcome to the program.
It is my sincere privilege to be with you and your audience here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Lue. I know your schedule is very, very busy with the book tour and everything, and we'll get to that book shortly. But I wanted to ask you to start the conversation going. What is your view on just the question of alien life in the universe in general and the science behind that?
Well, I mean, we're living proof that life does exist in the universe, aren't we? We're living proof. And not only is life prevalent, it's abundant. One only has to look at this little rock and realize just how pervasive life really is. John, I know you're a man of science, and I like to consider myself a disciple of science as well. And I'm probably a little older than you. I tell people this is gray, not blonde on my face. And so I remember a time when at the universities, certainly when I went, there was very narrow definition of what life is. And basically all life had to derive and have to have DNA of some sort. And we now realize that's not true because some life forms only have RNA, microbial life. And then we were told things like, well, life has to survive in a certain Goldilocks area where there's water and there's oxygen. And it turns out all that's wrong. There are these organisms called anaerobic bacteria like Clostridium botulinum botulism that's actually anaerobic, that actually will die in the presence of oxygen. It actually thrives in a low oxygen environment. And then, of course, there's microorganisms that live on the skin of the ISS space station in a near complete vacuum, right, where the solar radiation is much more intense than the UV radiation. You have microbial life living miles beneath the Arctic ice and even underground and the highest points of our natural Earth and in the deepest parts of our oceans. And so we're constantly having to reevaluate even ourselves. What does life even really mean? What does it mean to be alive? And it's a great observation because I think one only has to look at this planet and realize that life thrives virtually everywhere.
It is, and it has things that are related to it, but not quite life. And I know your background is microbiology. Look at the viruses.
Right.
What is that? And how prevalent is such a thing in the universe? And
a virus can self-replicate. A virus can protect itself. A virus can do everything that a living thing does. It just doesn't have DNA. It has RNA, right? And so, and there have been actually some, even when I was in college, back when Moses was around, they were teaching us that there were some scientists who believed that if there was ever a case for some sort of alien life beyond our planet, a virus would be a perfect candidate for that. That a virus could have hitched a ride on a meteor, come to Earth, and spread that way. And yes, that there was some serious conversation by some very serious virologists back in the early 90s, about that very topic and possibility. So I think NASA realizes that the narrow definition of what life is supposed to be probably isn't entirely all-encompassing, isn't completely accurate at this point.
And it has to be said, the first life on Earth were the anaerobes, as you mentioned. It starts with that, and maybe there's other ways it can start, and maybe it doesn't need water. Maybe it can use ammonia or any other sort of solvent, anything where the chemistry can happen.
Sure.
And you've got it.
Yeah,
that to me, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, people don't realize this. Water is something that we need to survive, but it's actually, to a lot of minerals, it's extremely destructive. It's caustic, in fact. If you put one of the strongest elements that we have in the natural world, which is iron, and stick it in water and see what happens to it, right? So it only works for us because we have evolved where water is useful to us, both from a metabolic and catabolic perspective. But in reality, there are other things that water's not is rather destructive towards. And so, is it possible that life has evolved somewhere in the cosmos off of something else? Is it possible that you don't have to be carbon-based, right? Maybe silicon-based. Look at artificial intelligence. We are getting close to the precipice where AI could become self-aware, meaning a conscious, sentient life form, but not based in carbon and not based in neurons, but based in capacitors and circuitry and silicon, rather than neurons and rather than carbon.
There's also to get even deeper into it, oxygen itself may not be the be-all end-all for intelligent life, because you've got very highly reactive gases like fluorine that, while they're rare, they would work. And so you have just many possibilities of alternative biochemistry.
That's right. I mean, look at methane. There's a reason why NASA is interested in sending more probes to certain moons orbiting Jupiter. That's because of methane. Now, methane is it's an organic compound. And we know from life here on Earth that methane is produced by the decay of carbon-based life forms. Also by the respiration and respiratory processes of life. Is it possible that we don't have to go searching throughout the Milky Way, that maybe life is just right around the corner here? And we're just getting to the point now where technologically we can discover it and begin to understand it.
And, Europa. In fact, the Europa Clipper mission just launched, and that's one of its missions, is to see maybe, in the plumes coming out of that moon, maybe,
That's right.
I tend to be a proponent that microbial life is probably ubiquitous across the universe, and that it's nothing special, and maybe the filters are when, other things happen, to lead to us. But at the same time, as you say, we are proof of concept of intelligent life in the universe. And that brings us to the topic at hand, the UAP phenomenon, which, is everywhere in the news and has been for a very long time, going back to rumors from 1947 and, very early stuff. What brought you into that world inside the Pentagon?
Well, I was kind of voluntold, to be honest with you. I didn't realize what I was getting into till after it was too late. Some people had met me at my office a few times, asking me some general questions. I had vetted them. They were government officials. And they had the blue badge, ICE Intelligence Community blue badge, which means they had almost the same level of clearance that I had. So we could have a normal conversation. And they told me they needed help with a particular program, very sensitive program, and they needed some expertise in counterintelligence and security, which is what my background was. And so after several meetings, still not knowing what the heck I needed to do or what this office was, I finally met with their director, Dr. James Lakatsky, who, if anybody knows that name, this is one of the world's premier rocket scientists. And I don't say that lightly, because there's a lot of really good rocket scientists. But this is a guy who could have very easily found himself several decades earlier on the Manhattan Project. That qualified. That intelligent, that elite when it comes to just intellectual horsepower. And at the end of our conversation, still not knowing what we were talking about, he asked me a very straight question. And he said, Lou, what do you think about, you remember him looking over his glasses and asking me the question. He says, what do you think about UFOs? And so I thought for a second and I responded truthfully. I said, Jim, I don't. And he kind of rocked back in his chair and he said, what do you mean, you don't believe in UFOs? And I said, I didn't say that. Jim, you asked me, what do I think about them? And I answered truthfully, I don't think about them because frankly, I don't have the luxury to think about them. I'm too busy chasing bad guys and worrying about other national security issues. I've never been a big fan necessarily as a kid of science fiction. I wasn't a big Star Trek or Star Wars fan. I was more of a G.I. Joe kid. And so for me, I never had that luxury really to be involved in science fiction. So it never really affected me. I never really gave it any type of serious thought because I just didn't have the bandwidth to do so. It was very quickly thereafter that I realized that, yeah, we're dealing with something very real. And there's a national security aspect to this conversation.
Now, in your time in doing that at the Pentagon, and I will come clean and open. I am an open-minded skeptic. I don't know what this is. I am not skeptical that people see UFOs. Of course they do. That, you see things unidentified. But some of this stuff from the Pentagon, like the Tic Tac incident, are pretty obviously something a little bit, probably not a balloon, you could say. And I'm sure you've seen even better stuff in your time. Would you say that whatever this is, in some cases, it appears to be technological?
It is technological. There's a piece to this that is very technological, very much nuts and bolts. And then let me correct myself. People are going to say, well, you said before there's no nuts and bolts and rivets. I mean that figuratively, that there's a tangible physical aspect to this topic. There's a technological piece to this. But with every piece of technology, there is a huge history and a tale that goes with it. You can't just simply look at a car and say, that's a piece of technology, because you have to then ask the next question. Where was it built? When was it built? Who built it? What is it used for? And all the other questions that come along that aren't necessarily always going to have a technical response. Eventually you ask enough questions and you start getting into a little bit more, maybe the spirituality aspect of this. When I say spirituality, I don't mean in a woo sort of way. I mean, really in a more esoteric sort of way, in a manner that involves human psychology, human sociology, our ability to perceive and to translate information and rationalize information into a thought that has a natural conclusion to it. I know I'm being a little evasive here. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you want to understand a piece of technology, you first have to have the capability inside as a person and the intellectual capability to understand that, right? So it's often like, there's a good analogy my good friend Steve Justice used to say. He said, imagine, or it might have been even Hal Puthoff. He said, imagine being Da Vinci back in the Renaissance, and coming across for the very first time a garage door opener. Now, electromagnetics has not been discovered yet. So we don't understand frequencies. We don't understand waveforms. We don't even understand plastic because it's never been made before. We don't understand rubber. And let alone, we don't understand why a house would happen to have a garage door for a vehicle that hasn't been invented yet. So, there's a lot to, you learn a lot from nuts and bolts, which was my focus, but there's a lot more to the conversation, to be honest with you, like any conversation, really.
Yeah, another analogy would be if you find a piece of a cell phone, a component, a chunk, a screen, it isn't going to tell you anything about the cell phone network. you're missing too many puzzle pieces to be able to.
How would you understand what 5G is if the electromagnetic spectrum hasn't even been discovered yet?
You wouldn't even know it was there.
That's right.
You wouldn't even know. Now, and which is an interesting point, because when we're glimpsing things like this, now, as far as, and of course, everybody's going to ask about Roswell and those sorts of things of purported materials being recovered. Is that the problem in looking at that kind of stuff? If we have it, trying to figure it out, is you're going blind. You're proceeding from a blind position to try to figure out something presumably far more advanced than anything you've ever seen.
Right. And look, one thing is, if you recover a Russian aircraft that crashed, chances are they might have some advanced technology, but it still works the same way as the technology we're familiar with. It's not necessarily new technology, it's just advanced technology. But when you come across something that is fundamentally new and requires a new understanding of science and a new understanding of the physical world, where do you start with that? Right? It's a pretty big leap of faith to just jump off in any direction and say, okay, this is what this piece is used for. Most components, like you say, in a cell phone, right, have all sorts of other components that they rely on. A screen by itself can't do anything without a battery, and a battery can't do anything without a charger, and the charger can't do anything without being connected to the electrical grid, and the electrical grid can't do anything without, electricity being supplied by a dam or perhaps a wind turbine somewhere, in the state, or a nuclear reactor. So it's not just that simple as picking up a piece of material and saying, aha. It's far more complex than that.
I always wondered if there was a warehouse somewhere where the U.S. government keeps things like Russian aircraft and that submarine that they recovered from the ocean floor decades ago, if they still have that stuff around.
I would not, unfortunately, be able to elaborate on that, but it's a very good, insightful question for sure.
Call it the Indiana Jones warehouse. But anyway, back to the topic at hand. Now, internally speaking, what did you guys discuss as far as possible solutions as to the origin of this? Did you get into scientific ideas like the zoo hypothesis, for example, that this could be, an alien machine or something like that that's, here to keep us bottled in and keep an eye on us, or some other sort of, what were those discussions like? And this is just all open science, speculative stuff that, is out there.
Well, there was a lot of speculation. I never had one particular narrative. Some people suggested that we were merely a gas station, that water was being used as a form to power their propulsion units. Others said that they suspected there was some sort of monitoring of our nuclear capabilities and to see our development and evolution as a species. Others suggested that they're here for a far more malevolent reason. Some sort of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and preparation of the battle space. Others had speculated that they may be here just out of curiosity. Why do we go to the Serengeti and watch the wildebeests migrate? Because we do, because it's part of nature. There's a lot of different theories. I was never necessarily wedded to one or the other. I think we need more information. I think we need more data. And I've always been, although I've been tempted a few times, I've always tried to resist the urge of trying to figure out what their intent is. Intent is something, John, intent is something that tends to be very uniquely human. There are motivations. All animals have some sort of motivation. When a shark bites the surfer, his motivation that he's hungry. But his intent isn't to hurt the surfer. The shark isn't even calculating that it's a human being, right? Living, breathing human being. He says, oh, something on the water, looks yummy, I'm hungry, I'm going to eat it. But intent is something a little different. Some of the more advanced primates and humans have intent, meaning we do things deceitfully. We do things to manipulate in order to get some sort of self-gain out of it. Most of the animals in the wild don't do that. They have motivations, but not real intent. Humans are one of the only real species that have that higher order of thinking, and therefore that complexity of thinking. And intent is a uniquely human and advanced ape aspect of our being. Artificial intelligence doesn't have intent. Artificial intelligence has input in and data out. Very simple. Is it possible what we're dealing with is also like artificial intelligence, meaning it just does what it does, or maybe it's binary. Maybe it's just thinks on ones and zeros, right? Yes or no. Very simple, on and off. We simply don't know. And the, from a national security perspective, to determine if something is a threat, it's a very simple calculus. It's capabilities versus intent. We've seen some of the capabilities, but we have no idea the intent now, do we? Or even if there is an intent. So it's very hard to, even from a national security perspective, even determine whether these things even are a threat.
I think one of the more spooky scenarios is that it may not know why it's here. It may have forgotten. It may have never been told. It may. It's just like sending out Voyager 2. We never told it what it was going to go do. We just programmed it to.
Well, how about the trip to, at some point when mankind or humankind decides to go to Alpha Proxima, with current technology, it would take us about 10,000 years to do it. That's only 3.5 light years away. Are we sure that the occupants of that, let's say that starship we were to send out, that notional starship that doesn't exist, but let's say it does, by the time they get to Alpha Proxima, will they even understand what their mission was all along, or will they have forgotten it?
Well, you can also apply that to machine civilization. If you have a von Neumann probe that has been sitting out there for millions of years, taking cosmic ray hits, it may be so corrupt in its programming that it has no idea what it's doing. It's just 3D printing out probes that are appearing irrational, in the atmosphere of an exoplanet or Earth.
It glitch in this system, so to speak.
Yeah, glitches in the system. Now, did you ever see any indication that it might actually be multiple different phenomena that are being mistaken as one, and that we're just lumping it all together, perhaps unwisely?
Yeah, that's always a possibility too. We do understand the morphology of certain crafts. You have lenticular or disc-shaped craft. You have cigar or rod-shaped craft. You have triangular-shaped craft, and you even have very rare large boomerang craft that are often reported. And then you've got some of these outliers like the jellyfish, right? And these orbs, if you will, or whatever you want to call them, right? These luminous balls of light as well that are often lumped into the UAP phenomenon. Interestingly enough, when I went to South America, the Mapuche people, the indigenous people, Aboriginal people of Patagonia in Argentina, in a little area outside of Bariloche called Las Lajas, they see these orbs, these luminous balls of light all the time. But they actually have a different conclusion. They believe that they are the spirits of their ancestors coming in to take a peek at them and make sure that they're okay and everybody is well. So yeah, I mean, there's always speculation that this could be multiple different type of variants, probably using a similar type of technology, kind of like an internal combustion engine, whether it's a Ferrari or a Chevy Impala. The physics is still the same. There's, one may look a little different, one may behave a little different, but at the end of the day, it's still pistons, internal combustion engine, transmission, power to the wheels, and away you go. So, that's a great question. And I think a lot of people have speculated that we're looking at different types of morphology of vehicles, probably even different occupants, perhaps, with probably similar technology.
Was there any indication of how the propulsion systems on these worked, and was it common? Did you see the same characteristics from different types of UAP morphology?
Yeah, great question. So that's correct. We did. And in fact, I talk a little bit about it in my book. I actually give a presentation on it that's a little bit more comprehensive. But yeah, there was in 2015 this proverbial aha moment within ATIP where the senior scientist came in, kind of barging through the skiff door, and said, "We need to talk." And after about a 3-hour conversation, it was kind of this eureka moment where a lot of the observables that we were seeing, both from a performance and even a human biologics perspective, could all be explained through very simple physics. Now, when I say simple physics, I don't mean easy physics, but I mean simple physics. Now, with simple physics comes very complicated technology sometimes to master physics, the simple physics, right? Look at gravity. If we want to break gravity, we have to come up with either a helicopter or a plane to do it. And we've only been able to do it maybe the last century or so out of the time that Homo sapiens been, scratching on the floor. So by no means am I saying it's an easy thing to do, but the physics seems to be fairly straightforward. And that what is happening is that whatever these are have created some sort of ability to create a bubble around themselves that insulates themselves from the external effects of the warping of space-time. As we know, massive objects, there's two ways to warp space-time, thanks to Einstein and his famous equation E equals mc squared. Now, most people don't realize this, but that is a very interesting equation because energy and matter are really coefficients of each other in that equation, meaning you can think of energy and matter as fundamentally the same thing in two different states. So what do I mean by that? Imagine ice being matter, solid mass. And now imagine steam being energy. Both are made of water, right? Both are almost identical. It's just the fundamental state in which they reside. One is extremely energetic, while the other is condensed and consolidated because it's cooler. Very much the same thing. If I take matter and I annihilate matter, what do I get? I get pure energy. And if I take energy and I go to the CERN and I start cooling it down and slowing it down, I start getting subatomic particles. So the two ways to warp space-time or to battle space-time, because we do know space-time is flexible. That's a fact. We've already proven that. One only has to look at their cell phone and look at a GPS signal and realize something through the phenomena called atomic drift, where the atomic cesium clocks on board the GPS spacecraft, even though they're the exact same clocks here at the ground station and have the exact same half-life, atomic half-life, they still run at different rates. Now, why is that? Because the clocks that are on the ground here on Earth, the warping of space-time is more extreme. And so time literally goes by at a slightly different rate than the atomic cesium clocks are experiencing on board the spacecraft. So we know space-time is flexible, and in some extreme cases, with mass, Earth warps space-time. The sun warps space-time because of its mass. And if you're supermassive enough, you make a black hole, and you warp space-time to the point where it almost becomes nonsensical. Now, are they using mass, whatever they are, to propel themselves across the vastness of the cosmos, if that is where they're coming from? Chances are not, because that mass would perturb the very mass of here on Earth, and it would be very destructive, and we would all see that and feel it. So the other way to warp space-time is with a tremendous amount of energy. And it turns out that if you have enough energy and potentially the right material, you can create at a localized area a bubble that insulates yourself from the external warping of space-time, meaning inside this bubble, the way you experience space-time would be fundamentally different than the observer standing outside the bubble. And what would appear like magic to me standing outside the bubble, to you, is just a walk in the park. What I consider extreme acceleration and hypersonic velocities, for you, you're not performing anything unique or extreme. In fact, to you, you're just operating like normal, and your observation of us outside the bubble is that we're actually all going in slow motion. And it's a little interesting. It's kind of a trick off of Einstein's relativity, but We believe that potentially that these UAP, their propulsion units are a little bit different than what we are used to. We have a car or an airplane, and you've got an engine inside the car that propels a car. This is a little different. In this case, the car itself may be part of the engine, meaning you have an energy source in the middle of the craft, and you then have a reaction with the skin of the vehicle, which happens to be a certain type of material. And when you have that interaction, all of a sudden, interesting things start to happen. Things that shouldn't be able to happen, but do happen. And it might even explain when people see the strobing lights, different multicolored lights. They say it looks like a police car sometimes, and that could just simply be a Doppler redshift blue shift. You could be seeing something that is going in one frequency that gets shifted up into the visible light spectrum, and now you're actually seeing its propulsion units. The triangles, for example, that have the lights on the apex of the triangle. Chances are those are not actually lights. It's quite possible those are part of potentially the propulsion system on board the craft.
Well, the descriptions of the lights, at least in the really good accounts, you're right. They're not lights. They're something to do with inherent with the UFO, because otherwise, an alien doesn't. They're not interested in following FAA conventions or things like that.
Yeah, they don't necessarily have the handbook on board with them, so it's probably not used for the same things we would use it for, right? It's kind of like I always tell people: imagine if a 747 crashed in the middle of the Amazon jungle, and an Amazonian lost tribe of the Amazon finds some of the wreckage, and they pick up a piece of glass from the cockpit, and now they can use it as a tool to skin their meat a little easier. But are they really reverse engineering the technology? No, they're not. They're just exploiting it for whatever current paradigm that they live in, and exploiting it for those purposes.
Now, that gets into a rather puzzling question that's vexed me for a long time. So, there are reports that these things crash, but they can't have been doing that for very long, because whenever a human throughout history finds a piece of metal, say a meteorite, they use it. Even if you don't even know how to smelt metal, you still use the meteorite metal, because you haven't seen anything like that before. And there are archaeological examples of nickel iron meteorites hammered into points, and this was even done into historic times. Maasai warriors in Namibia had access to the Gibeon meteorite and were hammering it into spear points into recent memory, until they realized that the meteorites were worth something on eBay. Same thing with in Greenland. There was the Cape York meteorite that was used by local peoples for harpoons.
I mean, John, let's not forget, King Tut's tomb and the famous dagger, the nickel
the meteorite dagger. But what we don't have is an aluminum one, or a piece of titanium done like that in an archaeological context.
Well, we believe that the crashes are more recent and may be due to a vulnerability, and particularly in the way the propulsion systems work. And that is to say that certain electromagnetic pulses, think of an EMP, just like they can disable my cell phone or this computer, can also interfere with the propulsion units of these vehicles, because of the way they operate.
So radar or some sort of EMP or something like that, they're susceptible.
Correct. Or the detonation of an atomic weapon, or the testing of an atomic weapon. There is a very strong EMP that is released, electromagnetic pulse, that interferes with all sorts of conventional technology, and it's quite possible. And there's also a huge burst of neutrinos as well, and neutrons. As well. So, I'm not going to bore you and your audience with a science lesson on atomic and nuclear technology, but it does seem to be a correlation there that the U.S. government has recognized.
Lou, that means that we've recently become some kind of a threat to this phenomenon, right? In other words, we are dangerous now.
Well, certainly we are not as susceptible willing subjects. It means that we have an ability to potentially interfere with whatever they are, and they seem to recognize that. And we can ascribe all sorts of intent behind it, But it does appear that, at least superficially, that they have a vulnerability.
Now, certainly someone within the government noticed that because I do not buy it when, a government official comes out in a hearing or whatever and says that whatever it is, it does not appear to be a national security threat. Of course, it's a national security threat when you don't know what it is. And given that we apparently sometimes can't even see gigantic Chinese spy balloons, we may have a problem here. What's your take on that?
Yeah. Look, we're getting into a part of a conversation here that I find interesting. Some people may find disturbing. But look, governments are no different than religions or any other type of institution where the citizens have placed their faith and confidence into a particular organization. Again, whether it's a government or religion or anything like that. And governments in particular have one job, and that is to protect their citizens from threats, whether it's environmental threats or military threats or ecological threats or financial threats. It is not a good spot to be in as a government to identify a problem for which you don't have a solution for. Okay? And if people say, oh, well, that's nonsensical, look, we do it all the time. Let me give you a case in point. When we first developed the U-2 spy plane, when the CIA had the plane commissioned with Lockheed Skunk Works, we did it in direct contravention to the peace treaty we had with Russia at the time, which was we would not fly manned reconnaissance missions over mainland Russia. But we did because we were afraid they were building nukes and we wanted to keep an eye on them. So what was our choice? Well, we would build a plane that would fly higher and faster than anything else, and the Russians would never be able to detect us. And you know what? It seemed like that was the case because for the first few missions we flew over Russia, the Russians didn't react. And so we thought, holy crap, we did it. That was to say until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile and successfully shot a U-2 down, and then went on to parade Captain Powers and the aircraft, bits and pieces of it, in front of the United Nations and the world, right? They did not even admit to their own Russian people that we had this capability until when? Until they had a solution to negate that threat, right? It wasn't until they could shoot down the U-2 did they ever admit that they even knew about it. And this is very common for all governments because governments are supposed to be solution focused. And when you don't have a solution to a problem, it creates great anxiety, and it also creates distrust, animosity, fear, and that's not what we want our citizens to feel. So therein lies part of the problem, that we don't like to admit problems that there are no solutions for until there's a solution.
Now, question. We briefly mentioned this, but I want to get deeper into it. Their interest in our nuclear capabilities, aircraft carrier groups and things like that. And, they seem to be, especially if such a thing can actually produce an effect on them, well, of course they're going to be interested in it. But were you able to figure out, and this is part one of this question, where you were able to figure out why they are so interested in nuclear reactors and things like that? And then I got a part two after this.
Sure. What you're saying is correct. There is definitely interest in our nuclear equities, not just ours. Other world governments' nuclear equities as well. Now, when I say nuclear equities, I don't just mean nuclear weapons. I mean nuclear weapons. I mean nuclear energy, nuclear technology, nuclear triggering devices, anything and everything nuclear. There seems to be a very keen interest by UAP. And furthermore, they have the ability to interfere with that technology. Now, some can speculate, well, it's like, parents taking matches out of the hands of kids. Well, that's fine if you think that. But let's look at the actual evidence and see if it exists. Where we have issues here, where we've had anecdotes of these UAP taking our nuclear weapons offline here in the United States. In Russia, the opposite occurred. They actually turned them on. So think about that for a minute. Secondly, in the 1940s, mid 1940s, there's only been one country that's ever used an atomic weapon, and it was us. And we vaporized nearly 800,000 human beings off the face of the planet with dropping of two bombs, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, with a yield of roughly 13 kilotons, and the other one I think was about 21, 22 kilotons. Nowhere did UAP come and stop that from happening. In fact, when we were the only country with an atomic weapon, nowhere did UAP stop the proliferation of atomic technology getting into the hands of the Russians, and then ultimately North Korea and Pakistan and potentially Iran and India and everywhere else. In fact, UAP didn't stop anything from happening when we were testing in Nevada, all our nukes, or Tsar Bomba from being detonated by the Russians. It didn't interfere with 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl or Fukushima. So to suggest that they're trying to prevent us from hurting ourselves, I mean, that sounds nice, but there is no empirical evidence to suggest that. What we do know is that they're interested in our nuclear carrier strike groups. Now, what is that? Well, you're talking about a nuclear footprint that when all is said and done in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean can be bigger than the entire nuclear footprint of the entire state of New York, right? You have nuclear powered vessels, nuclear capable vessels, nuclear armed vessels, and that's a pretty big big target, if you will, for UAP, and we believe that may be why they have a keen interest in our nuclear carrier strike groups, simply because of the nuclear footprint.
Part 2. There is an elephant in the world that also operates a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier group, and it is France. Did you ever have any contact with the French, and do the French see the same things from their aircraft carrier bases?
No, I can't speak on behalf of a foreign nation. It would be very inappropriate for me to do that. Whether we have or we have not, that's a question you'd have to. I would need permission from another government to answer that, and I don't have that. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to do a polite pass on that. But look, France has their own organization called Japan, and they have been very interested in the UAP topic for some time as well. Talk to Jacques Vallée; he can give you more details about that. But as far as what the capabilities are or what the interactions are with another foreign country, unfortunately, I can't elaborate on that.
Now, the other question regarding nuclear, interest. Does it appear that they're trying to harvest energy? In other words, I mean, could there be a neutron flux or something like that they find useful?
Could be, but there's easier ways to get it. We don't see what appears to be any type of bleed off effect where they're leaching any type of anything from it. It appears to be more they're just interested in our development. And there may be a reason for that. Look, if you look at a scale, and I don't know if your viewers are going to be able to see me on screen here, so I'll be trying to say articulate as I can, because I don't know if I'm actually going to be on screen for you guys.
We can make it happen.
So if you were to take a line on a piece of paper, and you start with two, start with two lines here. So if you look at a chart like this, energy versus mass, and you start way back here and you look at a glass of water. Okay? Glass of water sits over here. That is when you convert that into steam, you are separating the molecules from each other. But still, you're not breaking the molecules up, you're just separating the molecules. And that's a 1 times 10 to the third yield of energy. And you can go there and go now to an exothermic reaction like gunpowder, and you get now 1 times 10 to the fourth yield of energy, an exothermic reaction. Then you get down to splitting an atom. The smaller you go in mass and you break apart those bonds, the greater your energy yield goes up. And turns out that, long story short, any species, any civilization that finally cracks the code of how the atom works, and that there's a whole nother universe, subatomic universe, smaller than that, with infinite amount of potential for energy. It's probably a matter of time, maybe fait accompli, that within a couple hundred years, they will understand the technologies themselves to bend space-time, to warp space-time, and basically perform the same type of maneuvers that we are seeing with these UAP. Is it possible these things are just interested in us and our development? That the funny little monkeys are getting to a point where in the next couple centuries they may be able to travel the cosmos like they can, and now no longer distance is no longer really a problem anymore. And if that's the case, what would the impact be? If you've got some noisy neighbors that are pretty, they keep a sloppy yard and there's dog poop all over the place, but they keep it to their yard, and there's a big fence around it and you rarely see them, you're probably not going to be as bothered. But what happens when your noisy neighbors start doing the same thing around the entire neighborhood, right? And they start knocking on people's doors? Well, that's a different problem. And so it could very well be that they are just watching us very carefully because the funny little monkey is about to get out of his cage.
It could be. And that, again, that's the zoo hypothesis or a subset of it, which is the alien police action scenario where they're watching you until you do something like develop artificial generalized intelligence that can be a threat to the rest of the galaxy.
Right. I mean, look, we're doing it now with the tribes in Brazil and in the Amazon, right? We fly in a helicopter, we take pictures, and we monitor them. What are they doing? And there's going to come a point where we're going to have to say, okay, well, now's the time for contact. Now it's either they're getting violent or they're starting to raid a local village and they're starting to steal things. Who knows? So it could just be a monitoring mission.
It could be, or it could be like, we were talking with a shark, but in this case, like a grizzly bear. It's just staring at you with a half-hearted interest until it gets hungry. And then it just does something that,
That's what a bear does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what a bear does. And, and polar bears are worse in a lot of ways because they don't have as much food. So it may be that way for an alien civilization, is they're like, well, that planet may be useful someday. We don't need it right now. The monkeys can have their planet, but when we need that, and it just could be something very predatory like that.
That's right. Oh, by the way, can the monkeys defend themselves? If so, what are we going to have to do to take that little blue planet if we need it? These monkeys can be pretty violent sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, the good news is if they, people have pointed out if they were going to do anything, they'd have probably already done it. So we must not be that important. But
I don't know if I believe that. I don't know if I believe that. We're talking off human timescales here, but that's relative. A tortoise lives 200 years plus, maybe even older, right? The oldest tree right now is what, several thousands of years old. Time is relative. They're not on our time scale, whatever they are, timetable. They've got time on their side. They can do whatever they want, whenever they want. And so, to say that, well, they've already done it, I'm not convinced. Maybe they're, some folks in the Pentagon have speculated they're doing preparation of the battle space, maybe a 100-year, 200-year mission to do reconnaissance, figure out what resources are on this planet and what type of fight that they're going to have, and then be prepared for that. Do I believe that? Not necessarily, but some people in the Pentagon do.
It's interesting to think about the idea that, time to them, because we perceive time with our clocks and our calendars and our lifespan. Ultimately, we think 100 years is a long time, but it really isn't. It's not geologic time here. But if you have something that lives, on the scale of geologic time or as part of a hive mind or something like that, that just is effectively immortal, 10,000 years to it is nothing.
No,
absolutely nothing.
Right. Wait it out. Sure. I mean, it's not that big of a deal. It is to us because, our lifetime, like you said, are very compressed. If you live to 85 years old, you're doing pretty well. But that's nothing. That's a blink of an eye, right? In real terms of time.
For now. In the future, 300 years from now, people may live considerably longer, and they won't be able to.
We already are, aren't we? I mean,
yeah.
Look at the way we were back in the Middle Ages. Lifespan was, 38, 39, 40 years old, unless you were royalty. Now, most people are living into their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. And now with this new development of gene therapy and some other stuff where you can, biohack the system, it is very possible that the next generation or two may be living to 150 years old. And that's still nothing. Once you understand why why people age, why animals age, right? There's a genetic code that switches, and all of a sudden, the system starts to eat itself. But if you can turn that off and suppress that from occurring, then, who knows how long we could actually live.
True, and I mean, that is the future. But next question is a little bit more in depth about the Pentagon. Were you able to uncover the basic reason for the secrecy? Now, we all know that the Pentagon wants to protect the capabilities of its sensors and all that stuff, and they don't want to, tell the Russians what the Raytheon radar can do, and things like that, which that's obviously national security stuff. But they always say, it's the instrument that's classified. It's not the bird we photographed, But in this case, that does not seem to be the case. The UAP seems to have some kind of classification of its own. Am I getting that right? In other words,
so there is a UAP security classification guide. I'm not at liberty to discuss much of it. I was aware and familiar when it was being developed. There are very specific aspects of the UAP discussion that are indeed classified. Some of it is very classified. Why they chose to classify certain aspects and not other aspects, I couldn't answer that for you. I think some of it has to deal with sensitivities of the topic. Look, the Dead Sea Scrolls, when they were first found, you know how many years it took before the translations were released to the public? And do you know why that they were kept secret for so long? These are the Dead Sea Scrolls that they found in the 40s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they were obviously worried that it would, there were religious concerns, let's say that, even though there really wasn't that much there. But
That's
still.
right. They were afraid that it would contradict at the time, the present understanding of the Judeo-Christian belief system. That's not that uncommon. We do things like that all the time to protect the American mindset, and other countries do it as well. Now, is it right? I don't think so, but that's not my decision. You don't want to. There were several studies that were done in the past that the Pentagon and the intelligence community commissioned through formal channels, think tanks, and they all came back unanimously saying, if you were honest to with the American people about this topic, it will cause great panic and pandemonium. You'll have runs on Wall Street. People won't want to pay their bills anymore, and you're going to have complete mass panic on your hands. So the government decided not to have a conversation. I tend to look at it the other way. We're having the conversation now, and guess what? Everybody's still paying their mortgage. Everybody's still paying their phone bill. Everybody's still going to soccer practice and going to PTA. So I don't think those studies were accurate. Now, at the time, at the height of the Cold War, maybe. But we're not in the same time table anymore. We're not in the same circumstances or the same situation that we were in. And so I think we can have the conversation. And I think America particularly can handle the truth and deserves the truth about this topic.
Well, I think we're sufficiently conditioned by the pop culture and the presence of UFOs on, things like the History Channel and everything, all that constantly. People know what it is. They know that it's a possibility. My last question for you is this. Now, could there be an even more insidious reason for the secrecy? In other words, if they have recovered technology from these, I can't imagine they would hand that over to NASA. They would want to know how it works so that we can use it, and have a leg up on adversaries. But even if we can't figure out how it works, keep it around and keep it secret, because maybe someday we will. Although these things we tend to understand, I understand, you know what it is after you develop it yourself. So there's not a lot of hope for, back engineering very advanced technology. But is that the reason it's being kept secret? And is it under like nuclear secrecy or something like that?
Well, you're not far off on the nuclear secrecy side. There are some, during the Atomic Regulatory Committee time, they had some very interesting policies that anything that gives off a certain amount of radiation falls under those guidelines, period, full stop. And then you have the U.S. Espionage Act of, I think it's 1903, and some other laws on the books that really were used to enforce secrecy about this topic. There are potentially more insidious reasons to keep this secret. And it could be because of what we've done. And I'll give you a case in point. There were experiments what the United States have done in the past. And by the way, let me just make this clear. I love my country. Okay? I love my citizens. I love my government. But we haven't always been honest brokers in the past. People say, "Oh, our government doesn't lie to us." Well, okay, unless you talk about the Afghanistan withdrawal and Iran-Contra and the Pentagon Papers, right?
MK Ultra.
MK Ultra, syphilis experiments, right, where we allowed human beings to die. Think about that, and allow syphilis to go through its natural progression, just so we could study it, right? Even though we had the cure at the time. We have done abominable things to each other. Just look at the indigenous people here of this country and the way they've been treated, and the way the Army started to basically conduct mass genocide and get rid of all the buffaloes so they couldn't hunt, and they were forced to ultimately forced to their knees and subjugate themselves to this new government called the United States. We can all look back in hindsight and say, well, we're all better off for it, but are we really? And is it an excuse to treat people the way we have and keep things secret, only later on to find out what we did and go, yeah, sorry guys, well, about that, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Yeah, you're damn right we should have done that. That was wrong. And are we still doing things like that today? Sad to say that we are. And that's why we need accountability. This is why I do what I do. Look, I'm a disclosure advocate, but not just for UAP. People think, oh, you're the UFO guy. Actually, I'm not a UFO guy. I'm a disclosure guy. I've been part of some very interesting things that this country has done in the past. Some of it not very good. Some of it very good. Some of it not so good. And the only way we stop from ever making those mistakes again is being open and honest and being held accountable for those things. And that is why I think this topic is just one example of many, why the government needs to come open kimono about what we have known all this time about UAP. Now, I'm not saying necessarily give up, the crown jewels and say what we've been able to exploit from this and reverse engineer from it, if anything at all. But what I am saying is the mere fact that we're not alone in the universe. Let's learn from the mistakes of the Catholic Church back in the days of Galileo. When he first proposed the idea of a heliocentric solar system and not an Earth-centric solar system, they almost burned him at the stake. They made him recant. They even refused to look through the very telescope he had to prove his observations. Now, at the end of the day, did the truth about Earth really hurt religion? No, of course not. What it did was just challenge our ideas at the time about religion, but it never actually challenged religion. And I think we're kind of in the same boat here. I don't think this topic is going to hurt or threaten anything with our government. It may force us to recalibrate our thinking on some things, but I think we can handle that. I think we're grown up enough, and I think the new generation of people, the younger folks that are my kids' age, who are very responsible, very intelligent. They have what took me having to go to a library and reading an encyclopedia that was written 10 years before me even getting there, is now all available on this phone, worldwide, in any language in the world, instantly. Touch of a button. Think about that for a minute. Right? We are smarter now than we have ever been before. We have evolved more in the last 120 years than we have in the last 120,000 years. So that's my take. That's my perspective, anyways. I think we can handle the truth, and I think we deserve the truth.
And we must always remain vigilant in this democracy. Keep our country honest, keep the government honest, because the government isn't the problem; it's the people in the government.
That's right. Right. Look, sometimes to be a patriot, you have to do things that don't always necessarily seem patriotic at the time.
Absolutely.
But I could not agree more with you.
Now, everybody should check out Lue's book, Imminent, which is absolutely fascinating. But I got a special plug because I got the audiobook version, and Lue actually read it and did a fine job, even better than, a voiceover artist could normally do. So that was just very nicely done, Lue.
John, thank you. I don't have the sexy, smooth voice like you do. You have a natural voice for radio. I have a voice that's more akin to a cement truck hurling down a country road in high gear. So unfortunately, you had to endure that. I apologize, but thank you for the compliment. It's very heartfelt.
Oh, I enjoyed it. It was very personable and really added a personal touch to the story, and it was a very good book. So everybody should check that out. Lue Elizondo, thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure, and I hope whatever happens, we eventually get an answer.
John, my sincere honor and privilege, and a big shout out also to your partner there, Ross, who's helping make this happen. And of course, a very good mutual friend of ours, Rob, as well, by the way. So just wanted to say thank you.
Shout out to Rob. Event Horizon and my channel are now available as a podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube memberships. Early ad-free episodes, bonus episodes, and sleep-focused content. Sign up now by clicking the links below to your platform of choice.